Right. Welcome to your association or not-for-profit is probably not fit for the future. I'm Matt Tice, the CEO of Insurgence Group, and today we're going to talk really about the role of innovation in helping not-for-profits and associations to prepare for all the change and surrounding disruption in the industry. And essentially, this is part of a series of webinars and podcasts that we've done, which I'll make available in the chat after the fact for those of you who are interested in following up the topic. So just a little bit about us. We're a management consulting business. About 30% of our business is focused on not-for-profits and associations, plus or minus. Our key area of focus is helping businesses grow and deal with disruptive change, particularly in light of this very uncertain environment that we live in. I've written a few books, which are listed here. We have offices here in Sydney and Australia, and New York and Paris as well. So in a sense, we're a global boutique strategy, innovation, and leadership firm. If you're interested in these topics, we have a podcast, which I run bi-weekly with my colleague Rondo Moses from our New York office, which covers a number of different topics which does include not-for-profit and associations from time to time. I've made a note here that episode 8, which we ran earlier this year, covers disruption in the not-for-profit sector. You may find that of interest. So if you think the content here is interesting, please subscribe to the Insurgent Mindset on Apple, YouTube, or Spotify. I'd like to introduce Charles Cameron, the CEO of RCSA, which he's kindly offered to join us today to share his perspectives on some of the journey that the RCSA has gone through. Welcome, Charles. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Matt.
Looking forward to bringing you into the conversation in a few minutes. So what we'll do, Charles, is I'm going to just sort of talk through some of the main problem statements that have really come up in many of the assignments that we've worked on for clients. And then what I'd like to do is sort of zoom back and hear your thoughts on, as an association CEO, how some of these issues and factors play a role in your planning for the future and how your association is addressing these challenges. Does that sound good?
I'm looking forward to it, Matt.
Perfect. Okay, so no surprise that membership models are under pressure, and this applies to associations and not-for-profits together. Because the market is changing so much, many associations and not-for-profits are suffering from what I would describe as obsolescence of their core models, and that sort of generally shows up in terms of declining revenue, declining membership, lower yields, retention becoming more difficult, acquisition becoming more difficult, largely because the conditions upon which the original model were created have sort of moved on, and those assumptions that underpin those models have changed. So therefore, those models become more fragile, and the need to sort of innovate and adjust those business models becomes really important. And that's sort of falling in a background of a lot of uncertainty in the market, changing demographics. Many of the associations and not-for-profits that we work with have really struggled with this issue of kind of the digital native generation kind of coming up and consuming membership in a very different way. We're in a period now with moderate economic headwinds, which kind of on the margin affects the retention and acquisition performance of most associations, or at least those who are exposed to the market. And I think that's a big challenge. And that then leads to more competition for member value and attention, particularly as more substitutes for that attention are increasing, often through sort of, let's call it commercial subscription models, takes a little bit away. AI and technology takes a little bit away, and apathy takes a little bit away. And certainly, as we mentioned, with demographics consuming value in different ways, that plays a role too. So ultimately leading to diminishing returns in acquisition, retention, engagement, and yield, which are the key metrics. So that's challenging for a lot of associations. And the backdrop here is we're also living in a different world with, accelerating change in digital and technology. AI has come onto the scene, and that's kind of also influencing how these business models get created, both in terms of how members in particular are engaged in a digital engagement sense, but also in terms of how value is created and how efficiency also is managed as well. The other things I think that we've seen are that inflexible governance models and funding efficiencies are always in the background as well, as it gets harder and harder to generate that funding. So what I want to do is I'm going to frame a number of problem statements for you, and then Charles and I will have a conversation. One perspective on some of these challenges. So the backdrop here is what we really need to be clear about is, do we have our ducks in a row to make sure that our association or not-for-profit is managing all these issues and is making sure that its model is robust and resilient to all this change? Therefore, is your association or not-for-profit fit for the future? So the problem cases that we have experienced working with clients fall into a number of different categories. So I'm going to walk through them one at a time and share with you some challenges that hopefully resonate with your particular association or not-for-profit. So first, I think that the idea that member value and value exchange wrapped up in the value proposition of the association are durable. That assumption is often open to challenge, in a sense that, as we talked about, the way people are consuming value is changing, and often the way value is delivered by the association or not-for-profit is not changing. So then the question becomes, is there a convergence or a divergence of member needs and how members consume value compared to how associations and not-for-profits create that value for members or their constituents? So all this change then invites a question of, is our value proposition still relevant? Is the experience surrounding that value proposition still valid and robust to the future, given the changes that we've discussed around member demographics and changing needs and preferences in light of, substitute products or services offered in many ways by other non-association options. So I think that's really important, is like, at its core, are we still adding value to members, and is the way members are consuming that value still relevant and valid, particularly in this world of sort of digital evolution? So that's the first problem statement. The second one, and highly related to that, is if the way members or other constituents are consuming that value is changing, that then invites the question is how that value is delivered, and that recipe for creating that value, the business model, is that still fit for purpose? So how an association configures its resources, how it manages its channels, its partnerships, its networks, its advocacy, et cetera, that recipe may or may not be under threat, but at its core, really understanding whether that business model is going to be durable and whether or not that business model will be sustainably economic into the future is, I think, a key question that often associations and not-for-profits aren't really asking themselves, aren't challenging into, because often what we try to do is when retention or acquisition drop off, we try to create more value for members by doing more things, and doing more things creates more cost, and we tend not to get rid of the old things that we did, which then creates a situation where we're adding cost in a period when we're not getting the next marginal member coming into the association, which then creates almost a vicious cycle where retention and acquisition decline. We try to do more, adds more cost, and then progressively that makes the model less stable over time. So that sort of stand back and, taking a hard look at that model, that core model, to determine whether that still holds value for members and whether or not it's still economic is something that I think is really important for every not-for-profit and association to be challenging up to now. Now, just a short word, I think that, in many ways, with associations in particular, we often sort of divide them into two broad camps. Camp A is what we call non-discretionary associations, where participation and membership is essentially almost monopolistic in a sense that members must participate, and then discretionary memberships. So the non-discretionary memberships are increasingly exposed to market forces, which those sort of quasi-monopoly associations tend to be more vulnerable when there's a major change. And those who are exposed to the market, as we've discussed, tend to be a little bit slower to make adjustments. So I think depending on where you sit, if you're in a discretionary environment, being already exposed to competition in the market and so forth, you're more likely to pivot and readjust. But those in a monopolistic situation that find themselves exposed to the market do have a lot of struggle to make adjustments when things change. The third, and it's odd because we've just done so many projects on this, it seems to be something everyone's struggling with, is because the value relationship has changed, people are always wondering, to what degree is our pricing model still meeting the needs of membership? And, there's a number of associated questions that go with that. We often look at these pricing models and find that they're very regressive. And in other words, that smaller members, or if you're in a B2B membership situation, a trade association, as it were, you find that smaller members are paying more freight than larger members. And it's interesting to us that that's often opaque to the membership, to the association, because sometimes these pricing models have been created years or even decades ago and haven't been challenged. And as a result, we don't really understand the relationship between, member fee and acquisition, or member fee and retention, if you will, the elasticity of demand related to those fees. And then, of course, the changing value in terms of what people are consuming for that membership fee plays a role also in the pricing. So, I think that going back and being really inquisitive about your pricing model, how that relates to value, regressive or not, what that means in terms of elasticity, I think is something really important. A lot of people are talking about this, but I think we've probably done 8 projects on this particular issue alone in the last 12 to 18 months. So something to be considering. The fourth one really comes down to technology investment. And I think one of the challenges of incumbent associations and not-for-profits is when retention and acquisition of new members, or of new value, is under threat, we tend to pull back and not make critical strategic investments. So, in particular with the role of technology, and obviously digital AI plays a key role in everyone's thinking at the moment, but making that investment, which investments in which order, where do we place our bets? Do we prioritize productivity and efficiency? Do we prioritize channels? Do we prioritize new products? I think everyone's struggling with this challenge of where to place their bets in this highly uncertain environment. And in some ways, this uncertainty is created by this technology. So again, really important. Next one would be, many of the associations that we've worked with have a certain number of vehicles outside of their core business to try to create additional either value for members or to secure their economic future. Often that's through a venture fund or through subsidiary companies, or even other vehicles. And I think that often we find that association boards and management teams don't necessarily have the skill sets to really manage these portfolios of investments, and therefore, you know, kind of being able to manage those investments effectively and allocate resources to those is a key challenge. But equally, as we're getting declining, revenue and retention, equally, when do we tap our reserves to create that next generation of value? And then to what degree do we set up the association for long-term economic security? So there's a lot in this. But if you have a portfolio of investments that are designed to help your association kind of continue to generate economic value independent of membership, that's a different skill set, a different capability set, and does require certain skill sets in your management team and on your board to handle those things. So really important area in this particular environment. The next one, and I'll tip the hat to you, Charles, I added in this for our discussion, is this applies probably more broadly to the whole economy, but how do we leverage our networks and intellectual property to create new sources of value for members and more revenue growth for the association? So I think associations are good at doing what they do, but sometimes undervalue some of the IP that they may have created over the years, and certainly undervalue the value of their networks. So I look forward to talking a little bit with Charles about this issue in terms of how we think about this. And, there is inherent value in some of your intellectual property, and being able to sort of figure out how to pull that property out and turn that into new businesses or new streams of revenue or scalable opportunities to grow. I think those are things that every association needs to be standing back and having a hard look at. And then the last one really is a talent issue, and this will be my sort of segue into bringing Charles in. Getting the right talent in the board, and then all the way down to the back office is a challenge that probably all of us face. But I think many associations, because they're constitutionally set up to elect board members based on representation or other things, means that they don't end up with the skill sets they need to manage diverse portfolios of technology, omni-channel, digital natives, et cetera, and consequently may struggle a little bit in terms of making the investments that are required to secure their future, or make adjustments to help them become more fit for the future. And I suppose that also cascades down into the business as you're making these investments, introducing new products or new channels. Do you have those skill sets? And I find that often associations are slow to change and slow to react on these different dimensions. So, taken as a whole, these different problem statements represent a number of situations that in total may be affecting your association all at once, or there may be one or two things on the margin that you're dealing with. But I've not come across a single association that doesn't have at least one of these problem statements in action right now. So just as kind of a summary, if you're in a situation where your use of key product lines is decreasing, your engagement is low or declining, maybe even there's an imbalance between member and staff engagement, the value of membership is under question by your membership, or you're in a situation where your yield or revenue or profit per member is in decline and your reserves are under threat, these problem statements really must be at the heart of your thinking in terms of how you manage going forward. So, our methodology, which we call mission model innovation, is really designed to help associations to challenge these issues, work through them in detail, and basically come out the other side with a strong perspective of how do we invest strategically to achieve a fit for the future state. So enough from me. I'd like to introduce Charles. Charles and I have known each other for a couple of years. We've worked together probably since 2023. As I mentioned, he's the chief executive of the RCSA. So Charles, welcome. I'd like to just invite you to maybe share a little bit of your background, and then we can jump in and just have a conversation about some of the challenges that you're facing.
Yeah, thanks, Matt. Look, background, economics, labor law, industrial relations. So probably came into the world of associations very much through the traditional pathway, which is typically high levels of governance, challenges, and the need to collectivize, really. I then decided that there was an opportunity to go and run my own consulting firm. I identified as I was working for the Australian Industry Group, sitting on the phones, as maybe many association people did back in the day, that we were getting a significant number of calls of a particular variety. And something went off in my head and said that if everyone's asking that same question and this particular association said, oh, I'm not sure we can monetize this, I said, maybe I could monetize that. So I went out and ran my own firm. I merged that with a law firm. And when I couldn't deal with billable units, the opportunity came up to lead RCSA, which was a client of mine at the time. And here I am 9 years later, and fascinated by the world of associations and collectives, and really even to call a little bit, and I know it's used a little bit out of context, but you had a presenter on one of your podcasts, the Insurgent Mindset, recently, Vladimir, talking about wolf packs. And I know that was more in the context of the future of AI, and that the big AI, I guess, providers probably won't be fit for the future, and it'll actually be wolf packs. I'm actually of the view that I think we're going to see more and more wolf packs occurring because people need a place to belong, and they need to be pretty agile. So I'm very excited to have the discussion today, Matt.
Great, Charles. So let me just pick up on that, the Wolfpack sort of concept for our listeners who may not be familiar. And I certainly encourage everyone to have a listen to Scripter is his tag on the podcast. But what really resonates about that concept to you? And just give us a quick primer for the group in terms of what does that mean from your perspective.
So what I heard from that is that the very large AI firms, you know, the Metas and the Googles, Alphabet, otherwise, their ability to actually monetize their investment in artificial intelligence will be really, really limited, because AI will continue to evolve at such a pace that within months, possibly, let alone we're not talking years, your ability to actually get a return on that investment will disappear. So their inability to be nimble, their inability to respond and actually get that return on investment will create opportunities for far more nimble, almost like special forces teams. The reason it resonates with me is we're going through a process at the moment within RCSA and looking at, well, what is the future of our association? What does it mean to belong? And what does it mean in the world where I actually generally believe that there is I guess a questioning around hierarchy, a questioning around institutionalization, and we have the things that we're doing at the moment about look, really trying to accommodate the next generation. And I don't know about you, Matt, but I'm finding that many of them don't want to necessarily belong to a membership or an institution. They're very happy to come into a pack, join the pack, and then get out of the pack when they're comfortable to do so. So that's where I'm aligning, I guess, Vlad's concept to association concept.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. In my earlier comments, we talked about demographic change, and one thing that we do know, obviously, is the sort of digital native generation tends to be far more transactional in their engagement, surprisingly, right? So, I think that is a factor, and being able to sort of deal with that and kind of almost to be able to create the value, assemble resources and capacity to create that value, help the individual experience that value, and then blow it apart and reconfigure it in different ways is really quite important. So, that resonates really well for me too. So, Charles, maybe for our listeners here, give us a little bit of an overview of RCSA and some of the challenges that, notwithstanding the point about Vlad's talk, but some of the challenges that you see the association facing over the horizon, and what are you doing about it?
Yeah, so probably the number one is the change in demographics, which I think you touched upon, Matt, in your introduction. This concept of belonging to something simply because that's what's the right thing to do. So this idea of probably our parents, and I'm Gen X. It's probably less me, but certainly those a little bit older, and they're starting to sell off their businesses, get out of recruitment and staffing as a service. And as a result of that, those who are in their business and maybe being handed the business aren't necessarily immediately wedded to becoming part of our association. So we have 850 company members across Australia and New Zealand. Many of those run multiple brands and are actually multiple grouped businesses. So you're probably talking around about 1,500 across Australia and New Zealand. We, RCSA, are also part of a global group, the World Employment Confederation, of which I'm vice president as well. I'm a big believer in actually leveraging the network and the insights. So the challenge for us is how do we make relevant and how do we actually define value to our members? So a lot of our members come to us at the moment and say, show me the value, Charles. And most of their value is becoming increasingly determined by transaction. How can you reduce my spend on this with a lawyer, with a tech provider? Can you get me discounts? As opposed to actually understanding, and I'm going to go back to the wolf analogy again, the benefit of actually being and hunting in packs is that you are less likely to have predators coming at you when you actually have the protection of the pack. I see our job as going over the hill and killing bad law before it kills the business of our members. But interestingly, when I did a search on Gemini in preparation for this, I thought it'd be really interesting to ask the question, what are the around about 5 to 8 things that Gemini sees actually being essential to be fit for the future for any association? And in many ways, the number one was moving on from advocacy to being, I guess, a multifaceted value proposition. So for us, equally, we've had a large number of acquisitions. So the firms that are larger are acquiring many others. Our model, membership model, our fee model is based upon geographical presence and where they operate. So one of the things we need to look at is to say, wow, if we look 5 years into the future, many of these businesses will be able to generate the same amount of revenue, if not more, and probably a hell of a lot more, gross profit by operating from one single location with far less staff. So basing our fee model upon geography and number of staff, clearly that's going to be a problem pretty quickly into the future. And the final thing was very much in terms of, well, how do we define influence? How do we influence into the future? Government is slow. Most associations are there to actually promote your standards and also to protect. How do we actually stay ahead of government and be seen as part of a solution rather than in some cases part of a problem? So again, I'm really interested in this idea of what is positive influence, what is positive advocacy.
Okay, so there's a lot there, Charles. I think, let's start with the power of the networks, right? So have you thought about how to, put a value on that for your members and for, kind of describing almost building a network moat around the industry so that you have more, it's sort of an inbuilt resilience almost. So how do you
Yeah.
communicate that value, Charles?
Unfortunately, it can be really quite difficult because they're very transactional or increasingly transactional. So a lot of what we actually need to do is to bring individuals into, peer network groups, into traditional events and otherwise, and have other members sharing insights and value with others. I'm not necessarily the view that the future of associations will no longer be with people to people or face to face style of events or networking opportunities. I actually think that people are increasingly becoming less trustful of information in the digital age, and the way in which they'll actually receive and be convinced will actually be by hearing it from humans as well. So one of the things we're trying to do a hell of a lot more is actually bringing people together through multiple different forums. Again, this is nothing new, but we run different forums for different, demographics and groups right across. and it's critical that we have our members as promoters. So one of our key, I guess, principles is that it must be our members as promoters, because we can only say things so many times and then they say, well, of course you would say that. So we're really trying to think, what is the future and how can we use our Talent X brand, which is a large, I guess, solution, that an event that we created, which was designed to remove RCSA as the brand in that. What we wanted to do is open up the ability to participate. You don't have to be a member. You don't even necessarily need to come for the whole day. You can actually attend Talent X, and we don't want people to feel that this is part of a pathway to joining an institution, or as somebody recently put it to me, I know what you guys are, you're just a club for managing directors. And it's been partially successful, and it's been good working with you on a little bit of that sort of stuff as well, around this concept of the tent, which is the internal concept of, I guess, select information that not everybody receives, but then the fairground, which will make it more accessible. So these are the things we're currently working on.
Okay, Charles. So, just winding back a moment, I think that tension that you keep mentioning about sort of transactional versus almost member affinity, right, is breaking down a little bit at a time. So it seems to me like what you just described is creating more opportunities to experience the value of the association, but without necessarily having to go all in on deep affinity. So in other words, I can consume bits of that value without consuming all of the value. Is that fair?
It is. I'm going to go back to the Wolfpack because it was really insightful, I felt, is that I actually think part of the problem we have is that we continue to think that affinities have to be continuing affinities rather than short select. It's, if I think about my son, he finds it hard to watch a movie anymore, and I'm sure he's not alone there. He, even to that extent, longer form YouTube and otherwise. So I think one of the things we're looking at is to say, well, yes, affinity, but for a period of time. So come together, and you'll probably, I guess, have an understanding of almost the bush stuff, where you come together in the bush, you have a quite a unique experience actually dancing to a particular style of music, then you collapse it and you go on again. So it's like a pop-up. So one of the things we're starting to think is that, how do we respect the changing attention span of individuals in our community as well? And what will the future attention spans look like as well? So I actually think that affinities will be there into the future. The problem we've got, though, is if you look at the verticals and the horizontals across all of our members, very quickly you can end up with 30, 40, 50 affinities, and we simply can't service that. So we've got to start thinking about, how do we empower the members to actually do that? And then I've got the marketing crew going, well, we can't give them our brand to use the way they want. What happens if somebody says something inappropriate? So there's a real release of this whole idea that we need to control everything, Matt. And that's difficult when it comes to the board, because the board are there sitting there, and I don't know about most of the others you work with. I get it. I'm on the board of the World Employment Confederation. I'm primarily interested in what can go wrong rather than what can go right. And that's a change of attitude.
Right, sort of 2 feet on the brake and one on the accelerator, or it could be even worse than that, right? If you're lucky,
yeah,
right?
exactly.
So, as I mentioned previously in my comments, I think that being really strategic and educating your board about these challenges is a leadership challenge, right? So often the board is predisposed, as you mentioned, to manage risk and not manage growth and change. So you're sort of starting out of the gate with that mindset, which can be problematic. But also often the board, because they don't really have enough time to experience in the trenches, time with members, how value is consumed and created. Even just how demographics are evolving, things that we just discussed, and that they don't have that much time. So as a result, they're at really arm's length to all these issues. So I think the challenge for senior leadership like yourself, Charles, is how do you bring the board along? But at the same time, you also have to bring members along. And since in most or many associations, at least, that the board is designed to be representative of the membership. Often, like I said before, you don't get those skill sets that understand these commercial challenges. You get the member perspective, so it almost creates the double whammy where, members feel uncomfortable with change and the board feels uncomfortable with change because A, they represent members, and B, they just feel uncomfortable with change as directors. So what have you done at the RCSA to educate your board and help them kind of bring them along on your journey?
I'm not sure I have the answer yet, Matt. I've got, and I've spoken to them about this. The reality is that I don't think the representative model of governance is fit for the future. I think that everything is moving at such a pace that if we're not changing our board structure, and again, you may well have a representative input. One of the concepts that we're looking at is rather than having each of our geographical regions elect and appoint a representative onto the board, we're looking at different models there whereby we can create a super council so that they still feel that they have the opportunity to move on up through the ranks and actually influence our strategy, but they don't necessarily directly determine our strategy. So a super council that can actually bring people together at the beginning of our conference. Again, you might argue that's nothing new. It's just like a general assembly. The difference here being, though, that we will look to actually appoint individuals based upon their functional capability, whether it be technology, whether it be marketing. Again, I don't feel this is anything that new, but I definitely think we need to move away from this old model of it being based upon geography and based upon member set. So the other problem we've got is that what is an actual recruitment firm, what is a recruiter, is actually changing before our eyes as well. So the difficulty we have is that the people who have the higher profiles are actually being elected into these positions, and I love them, but they're actually probably at the point where they're going, oh, I'm probably not the best person to be asking the question around how do we digitize engagement across the whole of the federation as well. I'm not sure that's the one we've necessarily cracked at this point in time, Matt.
Okay, but I guess, what you're describing is really a multi-dimensional challenge, right? So, which zooming back to what I said at the beginning, it's, a combination of, okay, well, how are members or even non-members going to experience value in the future? And what does that mean? What's the model in terms of how you're going to deliver that value? What's the role of networks and other things that we've talked about? What's the role of pricing, right? So how do we align member fees? And then increasingly, to your point, transactional fees in a way that, really creates a tight link to how people want to consume the value that we're offering, all the way through to talent. So there's, virtually, as you're describing this, it seems that your fit for the future journey is about challenging almost every assumption about how the market works, how members and non-members communicate and consume value, how you express that value, everything.
Yeah.
Yep.
If I could just quickly comment on that, I see the role of RCSA as absolutely being a leader in the transformation of our members. And I say that not in terms of you should do this. I actually see that it's our role to be transforming before their eyes so that they actually have the courage to make that transformation themselves. I was speaking to somebody recently at CPA, and they were talking about the fact that they're trying to get many of their accountants to move away from just being compliant into advisory. We're similarly needing to move away from simply being transactional source and place candidates into actually being workforce management consultants. Most of them are very reluctant to do that because, as they put it to me, well, what happens if we blow up our business model in the process of making that transition? So what I see is that our role at RCSA is almost creating incubators to say that, look, yes, some of this will fail, but you actually want to be part of a network of individuals who are prepared to try, who are prepared to share, prepared to provide insights. And this is a fundamental difference we're finding over the course of the last probably 5 years since COVID. The power of the community is absolutely there. So our flywheel starts with a place to belong. And I fundamentally believe that, yes, there will be all these transactions, there'll all be these digital relationships. But I do believe with the pace of change and the feeling that I can't keep up, there will absolutely be a place for associations for people to belong. They might be wolf packs for a period of time. They might be longer term, I guess, packs that are going to be there for things of value. But we're definitely starting to challenge ourselves in how people will belong to us. And it's not like it has been in the past. That's the number one thing I can absolutely certainly espouse, is that the way in which we will belong into the future will be very different to the way in which we belong in the past, but we will want to belong. And I think my view, without wanting to get political, I think we're seeing that across the globe in terms of how people are actually standing up and, flying flags these days. They still have a human need to belong, Matt.
Yeah, absolutely. It's that deep tribal kind of it's hardwired into us, right? Um, it gives us psychological safety, and it's part of the human experience to be tribal. So
Yeah.
I agree that that will be persistent. So Charles, in terms of your own fit for the future journey, where did it all start for the RCSA, and what was the sort of the germination of the seed of this transition?
It was very much, as I mentioned earlier, Matt, the fact that we knew that our model for charging fees had a time limit on it because of the changing way in which business is being done. Based upon geography and staff. Again, you can operate a really good firm, especially if we move to platforms. So instead of human-based recruitment firms, there's a lot more platforms operating. Many of our members will actually operate out of, Bondi, and they might have maybe 3 staff and I guess programmers and developers staff, which would be more, and many of those are actually in fact offshore these days. So we simply can't rely upon that model. We will look to move towards a membership fee model based upon turnover. Again, that's nothing that new, but that's challenge. I guess the other thing we're looking at as well, though, is how do we actually derive revenue? How do we actually create revenue into the future that is not reliant upon membership fees? And the other thing, we're lucky, and I say we're lucky, we don't get government grants. I actually think many of our other brothers and sisters in the association world that rely upon grants, it stifles their innovation and you become lazy and reliant. And I've seen it in many other associations, as I say. The other thing that we do really well, and I'm very proud of it, 30% of our revenue derives from our commercial partnerships. So how we work in conjunction with Seek, with LinkedIn, with a whole world of software SaaS providers into market as well. And we're slowly moving them from being providers into actually being part of the ecosystem and members. Yes, we run events and otherwise that probably makes up about 30% as well. But as you can see, only around about 40% of our revenue comes from membership fees. So what we started thinking to ourselves is, well, if we have a little bit of money in reserve, how do we actually assist our members to even at the next level to be better than their clients? Because most of their actual competitors are actually their clients going in-house. So we decided, why can't we become like a little mini VC or a purposeful investment unit? So we took some of the members' money and the board, I love them for this. They were prepared to not say, let's squirrel that away and just try and build our reserves. We actually decided to go, and I did a venture capital course, and we actually went out there. We've set up an investment subsidiary called Talent Ventures, and we've made 3 investments in relatively small technology firms that we think will actually assist us to build wealth over a period of time, whilst at the same time giving value to our members. So that's been a really important change. Will it work? I don't yet know, but I think our members are looking at us and saying, wow, those guys are being innovative. They're doing something different. I want to be part of this. I want to belong. So again, the attraction of belonging is not just protection, it's innovation, it's trying new things, it's transformation, Matt.
Right, and I guess extrapolating that point, which is really interesting, is almost, Charles, while we're talking about is the association fit for the future, you've taken that another step and said, how do we help our members be fit for the future? Which, I really like that sort of mindset and that approach of sort of work back from your customer generally. But I think that point of, you can, well, I think the point you raised about the grants and sort of being lazy and sort of looking inside can be a temptation in a period of change. But looking outside and saying then not only how do we diversify our revenue, but more importantly, how do we fundamentally change how our members create and experience value? I think that's pretty
Yeah.
unusual to hear that from associations, Charles. Yep.
I'll give you a quick example. So during COVID, instead of sitting there and waiting for money to be handed out, what we did is we approached the government, the Department of Health, and we said, you've got a massive issue in terms of the number of staff that are working within aged care facilities, obviously due to COVID. We then said we can set up a managed service provider status. We can provide a service to you that will access via our members staff that can actually fix your problem. So it actually fixed the political problem, it fixed the health problem, but instead of it being a grant, and we don't look for grants, we look for commercial partnership opportunities within RCSA. And I think it's a really important shift of mindset in associations, Matt.
Yep, I think that's great. So Charles, as we sort of come to the end here, if you're speaking to a director or another CEO or a management team inside an association that's sort of looking to really interrogate these challenges and questions that we've laid out today, what's your advice in terms of where do you start and how do you get from A to B?
I love association people, but don't employ them. Look, you need some of them. You need some of them. And look, yeah, I'm probably I'm a proud association person, but I'm not an association person. I'm somebody who started up my own, online business called WorkPro. I ran my own consulting firm. Get people into your association that have run businesses and have taken risk. And when we're talking for-profit businesses, be prepared to give them the autonomy to try and test and push back and make sure that your board is ready for that. That obviously probably takes 2 to 3 years to get them on side and to build it up. I'll give you an example, our head of growth. I wanted to keep him. He's awesome. And he's fantastic at building our commercial partnerships, identifying opportunities for, I guess, joint projects with government, and bringing new ideas. He works, he has side hustles working with a supplier. He came to me and said, we've got this great idea. Would you think about investing in it? So we actually said, him and his brothers and sisters, we said, absolutely. Typically, I think boards and associations, well, that's not our money. We can't do that. It won't be your money when it actually all disappears because no one actually wants to belong. So I think it's starting with this idea of getting people into your organization and association, including the directors, who actually come with a mindset of taking risk and being prepared to lose money because ultimately, yes, we will ultimately end up net positive. So bring a net positive mindset to it as well, not just a let's control the risk mindset.
We have a term for that, Charles. It's called the insurgent mindset, right? So,
Yeah, it probably is, Matt. Yeah,
is
that's probably why
basically
I
how
love
do we
listening to your
become the
podcast, Matt.
challenger, right?
Yeah,
How do
sure.
we move from that sort of slow
And it's
moving,
contagious.
cumbersome incumbent? Yep.
It's contagious, Matt. You do it, other people want to become part of it. It starts, I don't know, it's like those fairy floss machines. The more they spin, the more the fairy floss builds around it, and it's fun too. People want to be around people who are fun, who take a risk, who try new things, who are innovative. I think that's what people want to belong to in the future, Matt. Yeah.
Yeah, well, that's right. And there's always this war for talent is never ending, right? So I think fundamentally people want to be successful and they want to add value and they want to create. And I think getting the right team in place to allow that to flourish, particularly in an environment where there's a lot of change and uncertainty, is absolutely essential. So Charles, I guess you've joined our podcast, and I want to thank you on behalf of Insurgence Group for coming together, sharing your perspectives, and certainly your insights. I think they're incredibly valuable. And I'd also like to thank you for our ongoing partnership. We've worked together for a couple of years, and it's been a lot of fun to watch you and the team along on this journey. And we wish you all the best success for the future. So, Charles, thanks so much for joining us today. And for those of you who want to get in touch, please reach out to mtice@insurgencegroup.com. charles.com, and we can continue the conversation. We'll more than willing and able to share the recording of the webinar to anyone who's curious about this. And I'm sure both Charles and I'd be happy to take your calls or emails if you have any follow-up questions. So again, Charles, thanks for joining us today, and thank you all for tuning into Is Your Not-for-Profit or Association Fit for the Future today? Thanks. All the best,
Thanks,
Charles.
Matt. Love your work. See ya.
Cheers.